Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Hello dear students, welcome to another lecture. In this class, we are going to continue with Great Expectations written by Charles Dickens, which is a part of Class 12 Alternative English Nagaland Board. Now in the previous videos, we've discussed about the summary of all the chapters across 1st to 59. We've seen the changes that took place with respect to the characters, the relationships that flourished. Whether we talk about the relationship between Joe and Pip, or the relationship between Joe and Biddy, and even between Pip and Biddy, we saw a huge transformation from what it was at the beginning and what it reaped at the end. We also saw the difference in the relationship between Herbert and Pip. First, they both fought outside the Satis house, and later on they both ended up becoming such good friends that Pip was secretly investing in Herbert's career, in Herbert's future. Then we also saw a development in Pip's relationship with Provis. The same convict he had helped innocently out of fear when he was a child became his benefactor. Initially, he hated Provis for the crude manners that he had, but it was the same Pip who spent the last days of Provis' life with him, nursing him, taking care of him like anything. We saw a difference in the relationship between Miss Havisham and Matthew Pocket. We saw how Miss Havisham, on the pretext of what Pip had told her, understood that Matthew Pocket did mean good for her and therefore gave a large sum of her fortune to Matthew Pocket. We also saw a difference in the relationship between Estella and Pip by the end of the story, where Estella finally agreed to have developed a human heart which had feelings, which had love. Now in this class, we are going to discuss the themes of this story, The Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. The first theme that we shall discuss about is the social class. Now, in the entire story that we read, you saw for yourself that class played a very important role in the entire story. The movement of the people from the lower class or the poor classes towards the higher class, the desire, the wish, the ambition that the people had to acquire wealth and position and class was very much evident throughout the story. We saw it through Pip himself. First, we saw Joe and Biddy, who were very happy working as the poor working class people. They were satisfied with whatever they had and did not have any desires to move ahead in life. Then we saw Miss Havisham, whose family had made fortune of money working through the brewery, being the manufacturers of beer. Then we also saw Mrs. Pocket, basically Matthew Pocket's wife, who simply wanted to have a title in her family, and for that she had rendered useless to the society herself. And then, yes, from aristocracy to nobility to being gentle, we saw a lot of different classes across the novel. We saw Pip, who tried to be an educated person so that he would gain good manners. And on the other hand, he himself ended up spending luxuriously on things and was in the debts by the end of it. Then we also read about Provis. When Provis arrived to London, he was very much ignorant towards the fact that power and money can buy gentility as well. Provis misguided whatever trust he had in his money, and Pip also started understanding him in the same manner. Now, Charles Dickens again brings out the relationship between being noble and the class, and the heroes of the novel were certainly Joe, Biddy, and Provis, who, despite belonging to the lower class, were very upright, moral civilians. They were kind, they were loyal, they were noble, they were generous. The villains were obviously Compeyson and Drummle, who belonged to the upper class but did not know how to make use of their power and their wealth. Pip, by the end of the plot, comes out clean as a character and becomes nobler and gentle and understood the true worth of being generous as well as being wealthy. The second theme of the story is undoubtedly ambition and self-improvement. Now, Pip was obviously a metaphor, I would say, or a symbol, I would say, through which Charles Dickens talked about the worth of ambition and self-improvement in the entire story. Pip was somebody who wanted to grow. Pip was never happy with the way he lived, especially after Estella's insults. He never liked the way he was growing up, and therefore, even after becoming Joe's apprentice, he was never happy with the profession that he was a part of. And therefore, he wanted to move ahead. And on the first opportunity, he just took hold of that and he decided that he would move to London, leaving behind his own family, his sister, Mrs. Joe, who was his true and loyal friend, and Biddy. So just for the sake of his own ambitions, he decided to move ahead. Then we also saw how Pip was trying to improve upon for the sake of becoming a suitor of Estella. Then we learnt about Joe and Provis, who themselves were not very wealthy, very well off, but were extremely kind and generous and genuine people. Then, we saw by the end of the story that Pip's ambitions had actually come a long way between him and his family, his personal life, his relationships could not flourish because of the same. But he did get a second chance and he made good advantage of that and he mended things with Joe and Miss Havisham. And by the end of it, Pip got encouraged and ended up repaying all the debts that he was endowed with. Another theme of the story is integrity and reputation. Integrity and reputation mattered the most to the people, to the character of this novel. From Estella to Bentley Drummle, who were very proud of their snobbish, of their they were very arrogant, they were haughty, they were proud of the wealth and the power that they possessed. And then on the other hand, we had Joe and Biddy, who were morally so good, they were so upright that it did not matter to them much whether they had money or not. So this was the difference that, the stark contrast that can be seen in the characters of Great Expectations. These people who wanted to use their integrity and reputation as a tool to move ahead in life, and people like Joe and Biddy who thought that before becoming wealthy, it was important for them to be righteous and to be morally sound. Then we also had Mrs. Joe and Pumblechook, who always pretended to be very, respectable and, nice and morally good people, but they were always pretentious. They were false. They were always on the other side of being good. And again, Mrs. Joe, Bentley Drummond, all these characters, they just made sure that their integrity and their reputation mattered to them so much that they did not pay any attention to the relationships, to the family, to the love and affection that they ended up getting. They were always self-sufficient with the money that they had, that they could not think of any other way or any other means to make them happy and satisfied in life. Estella first was the one who actually triggered Pip to get a reputation in his life. And when Pip was running behind the save, she left Pip all of a sudden for the sake of Bentley Drummond, who happened to be wealthier than him and who happened to be at a better position than Pip. Then along the story, as the story progressed, we met two wonderful characters, Wemmick as well as Herbert, who proved to be the turning point of Pip's life, who actually showed him what true friendship was, who showed him the value of relationship, the value of family, the value of true love. The relationship that Wemmick had with his father, aged, and the relationship that Herbert had with his girlfriend Clara. So that made Pip realize the relationship value and how much it was important, how much it mattered for one to have a family and to have a love in one's life. The next theme of the story is parents. Now, parents is one subject in the story which is actually a very confusing one. Pip, Provis and Biddy, all three of them have been told as orphans. They were all orphans. They did not have parents. Then there were other people in the family who either they were not orphans, but their families were totally broken or dysfunctional. That is Herbert. Their family, his mother was totally dysfunctional in character. Miss Havisham, Estella, Clara, Joe, each one of them had a family, but their families were not at all the safer one. Then we talked about Wemmick, whose relationship with the parents, was an exceptional case, obviously, and that is why Dickens used this character in order to showcase the fact that in the dark, in the grey, there is still blue, there is still brightness, there is still sunshine that can be followed. And then the relationship, that started between Joe and Biddy and the child that they raised, whom they named as Pip. So that obviously indicated a positive side to the same, that they were certainly going to be good and wonderful parents to their child. Then Estella's parents, Provis and Molly, both of them have had criminal records in the past. So, that was again something which was amiss. As I said, Herbert's parents, Herbert's mother always was running behind a title, and because of that, she was rendered totally futile, for the family and for the personal life. Now, instead of showing any sort of traditional mother and father in his story, Dickens had used adoptive parents, mentors, and guardians in the entire story. Joe was one of such character who was Pip's guardian, and he was an epitome of love, kindness, protection, warmth, and continued to nurture Pip irrespective of how he behaved. He raised Pip in a wonderful manner, and even when Pip did not consider paying back his gratitude to Joe, he did pay his debt and was always happy to see Pip around. Then Mrs. Joe has been portrayed as a guardian over here of Pip again. Miss Havisham was Estella's guardian, and they were selfish. They were making use of the little ones for their own personal interest. Mrs. Joe was always behind Pip, and she got happy when Pip was hired by Miss Havisham, hoping that that would earn her a better name in the society. Miss Havisham also used her daughter, her adopted daughter Estella, so that she'd be able to take revenge of heartbreak from the other men in the society. So this is how the parental relationship has been portrayed in the story. Then comes the theme of justice. Now, justice is again something which has to come in a story which involves convicts. So Pip met the escaped convicts at the beginning of the story, in the first part of the novel itself. And then the same convict continued to have a very big impact on Pip's life throughout. Mr. Jaggers was his mentor, who was endowed with the responsibility to ensure that Pip was not wasting the resources that he had got from his patron, from his benefactor. Wemmick also had separate moral codes for himself. He never mixed his personal and his professional life, and that was the reason why Mr. Jaggers never knew where Wemmick lived or who all were there in his family, and nobody was even informed about Wemmick and Miss Kiffin's wedding. Then there were Orlick and Compey's son, who were villains in the story but were not given the true punishment that they deserved. And then Provis also underwent with a wrestling match with Compeyson near the marsh, but then they both were sent to the jail. And then obviously Miss Havisham did not do justice to those suitors whom she had sent Estella to meet. And this is how justice was not served in number of purposes. At the end, Provis, who was actually a noble and a kind person, was called out in the court as a man who had been committing crimes since infancy. So, this clearly shows that irrespective of how good he was, of whatever he had been through in his life, whatever changes he encountered in his life, Provis died a very painful death and could never get a clear name for himself. The next theme in the story is that of generosity. Now, we could see generosity in abundance in the story. Pip initially was very generous towards Provis, but that was because of the innate fear he had. That is why he helped Provis in the first place. But by the end of the story, he understood Provis's generosity and love and warmth, and that is why he spent the last few days of Provis's life with him in the cell, and that is why he even told Provis on his deathbed that he knew who his daughter was and that he loved his daughter. Mrs. Joe and Uncle Pumblechook, they have just acted generously while they had not even a dent of generosity within them. Another character who had generosity in abundance within him was Joe. Joe was certainly an epitome of love and kindness. He raised Pip like his own child. He helped Pip repay his debts at the end of the plot, irrespective of what Pip had done to him. So Joe was indeed very generous. Pip also turned out to be generous because he secretly invested in Herbert's career, and Herbert was successful because of Pip himself and because of the request that he made to Miss Havisham so that she could invest in Pip's career. So Pip, Herbert, Joe, Provis, These are the generous characters who did not get immediate recognition in the story. Their recognition was impending, but by the end of the plot, they got the due reward that they deserve. Now, my dear students, let us discuss the character sketch of a few major characters in the story. The first, obviously, was the novel's hero, the narrator, the protagonist, Pip, or Pip, in short, who was an orphan who lived with his sister, who was very selfish, Mrs. Joe, and served as an apprentice to a very gentle blacksmith, Joe. Now, Pip was sensitive and was very curious, but was ambitious at the same time. He got a lot of money as a teenager, and the moment he got that, he did not leave any chance to use that money to make a fortune of that, and he became haughty, and people started calling him sir, and he did not have a problem with that as all. He was doing everything he could to match up to the standards of Estella, the women he loved. And then Pip was very, very rude and selfish towards Joe and Biddy and was avoiding them because of their lower class. But by the time the novel ended, Pip learned to judge the true characters of the people. He understood that money and wealth will only bring one superficial happiness, but the internal happiness lies with relationships and love. Then we have Abel Magwitch, who was the convict, also disguised as Provis. He was the escaped convict whom Pip helped in the beginning of the story. And Provis, or Abel Magwitch, was so impressed by the generosity of this little boy that he decided to devote his life savings towards changing Pip to a gentleman. Provis was himself born on the streets and was repeatedly cheated by Compeyson. Provis had been living in and out of the prison. He had a criminal record. He was very unfortunate with his past. His daughter was Estella, but has been portrayed as a highly kind, generous, and good-hearted human being. Then we have Estella Havisham, Miss Havisham's adopted daughter. She was proud, she was very clean and refined, she was beautiful, she was arrogant, she was heartless, and she was raised by Miss Havisham in such a manner that she would take revenge from the male sex. And beauty and elegance were two features that she used to attract all her suitors, including Pip. Miss Havisham raised her in such a manner that she did not have a human heart and was unable to love, which she accepted on her own. Then we have Joe Gargery. Joe Gargery was Mrs. Joe's husband and was a father figure was Joe throughout the story, ever since the childhood till the end. So Joe Gargery was very generous and kind, and he himself had been through a very harsh parenting. He was a village blacksmith, did not have any formal education, but was very respectable human being. His moral standards were very high. He was loyal, generous, kind, loving, affectionate towards Pip, even when Pip did not regard him for what he had done. Then we have Biddy. Biddy was an orphan whom Pip met in the village school where he would go to attend the evening classes. Biddy moved to the forge to help Mrs. Joe after she was hit on her head by the club, and then she became a school teacher later on. She was also a very humble, a kind, moral, and very intelligent character. She had a lot of knowledge despite the fact that she did not have a formal education. She also was very sharp, and she always helped Pip to get out of his delusions and would always lecture him when he was going wrong. Miss Havisham was a wealthy daughter of a brewer, and she was left on her wedding day by her fiance. And in the later part of the story, we got to know that her fiance was nobody else but Pompey's son. Ever since then, she was very traumatized, and she was always found inside her house in the wedding gown. She shut herself out from the world for 20 years, and in order to take revenge from the males, she adopted and raised Estella to become a beautiful and a desirable woman. Miss Havisham, in the beginning, has been portrayed as a very manipulative, a very capricious kind of a lady, but by the end, she understood everybody's pain, and that is why ended up giving a large share of her property to her cousin Matthew Pocket and also her nephew Herbert Pocket. Then we have Wemmick. Wemmick was Mr. Jagger's clerk. He worked with Mr. Jaggers. He was a very rational, a very money-minded character, and when at home, Wemmick's personality underwent a drastic change. He was warm, he was empathetic, he was very homely, and he nurtured his father, the aged, in a wonderful manner. The relationship that has been shown between Wemmick and aged is the only true parent-son relationship which has been shown in the entire story. Pip and Wemmick were good friends outside the office, but inside they had a very strict professional relationship. Then we have Mrs. Joe Gargery. Mrs. Joe Gargery was Pip's old sister and was his guardian. Mrs. Joe was very aggressive. She was dominating, she was selfish, and she abused both Pip and Joe. She was obsessed with the fact that she wanted to have a status and a reputation of her own. And even after she was attacked by Orlick that gave her a brain damage, she underwent a transformed personality and became patient and compassionate and very quiet. Then we have Compeyson. Compeyson was a villain, the scheming person who used his educated upper class appearance to trick people. He made people think that he was honorable, and that is how he used Provis. He used Provis on the pretext of, using him for his crime. Also, Compeyson was the one who used Miss Havisham to get the money from her and never showed up on the wedding day. So these were the main characters of the story. Let us have a look at a few important questions of this story as well. Now, the first question that I would like to discuss with each one of you is about Estella's parents. So, who are Estella's parents? We got to know by the end of the plot that Estella's parents were Abel Magwitch, who was Provis, and Molly, who was working with Mr. Jaggers as the maid. This discovery was reached after Pip got to know about Molly's past and also about Provis's past, and this is how he connected everything well. And then one of the other important questions in the story is the justification of the title of the story, Great Expectations. So the title of this novel, Great Expectations, is very well justified because the story indeed revolves around the great expectations of Pip, his ambitions, his desires, his wishes to get a name for himself could be seen from the beginning till the end of the plot, and that is why his expectations played an important role. Who was Pip's benefactor? So Pip mistook Miss Havisham to be his benefactor at the beginning of the plot, but he realized and discovered soon that it was not Miss Havisham but Provis, that is Abel Magovich, the convict whom he had helped when he was a child, who was his benefactor, who wanted to see him as a gentleman with a refined character and good education. Why did Pip become ashamed of Joe? So Pip was ashamed of Joe because of the importance that Pip paid to reputation and class. Pip has been shown as a haughty and arrogant personality. The moment he moved to London and he had money, he was ashamed of Joe's uneducated formal manners, his dressing sense, and was not even happy when Joe was visiting him the first time with Mr. Watson. Why did Estella reject Pip's love? Estella rejected Pip's love on the account of the fact that she accepted she was heartless. She accepted that she has been raised in such a manner that she did not know what true love and emotions were. She preferred to marry Bentley Drummond because of his wealth and because of his social position. She laid more importance to one's social integrity and position rather than love, but by the end she realized her mistake as well. How did Miss Havisham feel about her behavior at the end of her life? So by the end of her life, Miss Havisham was ashamed. She regretted at how she had raised Estella. She realized that she was doing a wrong thing by using Estella to take revenge from the male counterpart. Miss Havisham also realized that she should help those people who were kind to her, that is Matthew Pocket and Pip as well, and therefore she sought forgiveness from Pip. So with this, my dear students, we come to the end of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. In the lectures, we've discussed the entire summary of the story at stretch. We talked about the relationships in the characters, the themes in the story, the character sketches of all the major people we came across, along with a few important questions. So with this, I would like to pause here and hope that you've understood the fiction well. So I shall see you all now in my next lecture. Thank you.